I'm going to call to order the meeting of the Manchester Emergency MBTA Task Force. And I'll take a roll call. Sarah Mellish here. Michael Pratt is not here yet. Carlin Morris
Here.
Ann Harrison is here.
Just arriving.
Elizabeth Gilbert,
Here.
Sandy Bogger Turner.
Here.
Richard Smith. We have Denny Hall.
Here.
I do know that Richard Smith needs to participate. Richard Smith is
I
on
think
Zoom.
I think I'm here.
Okay,
There you are.
hey, Richard's
Excellent.
there on Zoom, good for you. Okay, the first item on the agenda is acknowledgement of receipt of correspondence. Noted that, Ms. Giovanni has forwarded 3 emails to the task force. We also want to note that Mary Foley sent an email to the task force. So I do have a few things I'd like to say before we get into the rest of the agenda. And the first one has to do with responding to comments and questions such as Ms. Giovanni's and Mary Foley's. And I want to try to make it clear that when things are directed to the task force, that the task force should respond, but not individual, because if you dilutes the message we're trying to give out to everybody. So, if people would like to make a response to someone's email or correspondence, I suggest they present it to the board for consideration, and we can decide how we'd like to respond as we go. And we can disagree, and that's fine. That's because we can say that a response as well. A couple of other things. In the last, I watched the video of the last meeting, and I have a couple of answers for a few things. There was some talk about inventory of housing. Here, the town does have a housing production plan, which is a good resource. I'm going to ask Tiffany to post it on our website as well. It talks about both existing conditions and needs for additional housing. So I think it's a useful document.
Is that part of the overall master plan, Chris?
No, this is a
Separate.
separate
Okay.
thing.
Do you know the date that was
It's
created,
in
Chris?
2019, so it's a couple of years out of date, but it's still got pretty good information.
Good.
There was some discussion about being upfront with residents, about being realistic about the impact on zoning in the town. I think, Richard, you made a couple of very good points. And I agree that we should not be sugarcoating anything about what we're doing here. But on the other hand, I don't think we should be fear mongering either.
Right.
We're not talking about creating Rantoul Street in Manchester. And I think anyone who makes that kind of statement, not that I've heard it recently, should be challenged, because that's not what we're up to. We also can't predict what kind of development is going to result as a result of this zoning change. Or for that matter, what kind of development might occur without any new zoning changes. But what we can do is preserve the character of the town by creating reasonable controls to manage development in either scenario. And finally, I think we should also recognize that the creation of different types of housing will benefit the town by providing residents with new opportunities and different kinds of opportunities for housing, and that any new residents will support local businesses. Now, there'll be impacts in terms of traffic and parking and all the other things, but I think we should recognize that there are benefits to this as well. And a final thing, I'm going to send out a memo to everybody this week. I've tried to organize how we're proceeding with this, and I want to do it with a series of questions that the task force is going to have to answer. This is a random set of questions. It's not going to be in this order necessarily. But I'd like everyone to, when you get the memo, think about it and add other questions as well. So here are a couple of them. First, do we create a single district, or are we creating several districts? I think that's one very big question. Second is, are we gonna be focusing just on the general district? Or are we gonna consider changes to the residential districts as well? Third, is it best to tinker with existing zoning regulations, or do we want to create an overlay district or districts specifically designed for the MBTA zoning mandate? Number four, do we want districts beyond the 1/2 mile radius, or are we going to just stick to within a 1/2 mile? Five, how do we change zoning to allow what are currently non-conforming multi-unit properties to be allowed by right so that their units can be counted?
Could you say that one again, Chris?
How do we change zoning to allow what are currently non-conforming multi-unit properties? So they could be allowed by right, so their units could be counted.
Got it.
Does that? Is that a how or a whether?
I said how, but it could be whether.
Okay.
Number six, do we establish a minimum threshold of compliance and then add potential special permit exceptions, which might be of greater benefit to the town? So, for example, we could allow by special permit a larger multifamily development if they included a senior center by special permit.
If they include what?
Senior center.
Okay.
Number seven, do we try to address the mandate by allowing just 3-unit properties, or should we propose any changes that would allow larger developments on larger parcels? Number eight, do we try to protect retail uses by requiring mixed-use properties with residents located on the floors and the commercial uses on the first floor? Number nine, will we require or provide incentives for affordable housing or mixed uses? Number 10, do we want to empower the planning board or the historic district commission to review design? Number 11, do we want to do anything to prevent or delay the demolition of significant buildings? Number 12, do we want to require site plan review by the planning board for all properties or just larger ones? Number 13, do we want to propose design guidelines? Number 14, do we consider form-based zoning, which establishes specific design guidelines for individual properties or smaller districts? Number 15, do we want to establish a list of historical or other significant properties that we wish to protect? And number 16, do we want to create some areas of greater density to balance neighborhoods where less density would be appropriate? So those are my
Wow.
questions.
Love it.
Great list of questions.
Well, so I'm gonna send this out to everybody, and the next meeting we can.
It's our homework.
That's homework. That's your homework assignment.
Okay.
There'll be a test. as well.
Okay,
Do you want us to send our responses to you or to
I
everybody?
think we should, I think we've done this, the open meetings, so we should send them to Gail and Gail can distribute them to us.
Okay.
Okay, moving on to the agenda. Betsy, the status of the scope of services for the MBTA zoning consultant.
It has been sent out. And it's been sent out to about 6 consultants. Who, several of whom I know are available and who are up to speed on this.
And when's the due date?
I think it's the 5th of October.
I think so, so it's not a Friday, whatever that first Friday is.
Yeah.
And we are all gonna make a selection together, or we'll make a regular recommendation to Greg? How is this gonna work?
He's the purchasing agent.
I would suggest, a couple of you.
Okay.
Rather than the full committee, it's a little quicker and easier.
Can we establish a little subcommittee of people who'd like to review the consultants' credentials? I'd kind of like to do that.
I would suggest someone who's really good with technology and data as the other person.
Oh, not on the committee, but on.
No, as one of the
Reviewers.
reviewers.
Well, Richard's pretty good with.
Richard, would
technology
you
and data.
serve on the committee to review proposals?
Happy to.
Anyone else volunteering?
I'll pass.
I'll be out of town.
Okay, well, that's all right, we'll,
I'm out of town.
anyone who can participate is welcome. And I guess what we'll do is, oh, good, okay.
Yeah.
So we'll probably have to post a meeting to do that in the subcommittee. Okay, anything else on that? Right, Greg. If you tell us about funding, resources.
So we did a 10-year review of grants that fall under the expanded list of grants that the state has said is would be impacted for communities that aren't in compliance. So bottom line in 10 years, about 5.2, almost 5.3 million in
And this is a
grants.
look back or partly look back, look forward.
This is look back the last 10 years.
Aha, great.
Um,
And then the bottom part is looking forward.
Thank you.
Great.
So Greg, one question. Does this include that list in the August revision of the guideline?
Yes.
It does, okay,
Right,
great.
so this captures that latest list. Town accountant Andrea Melville put together this list for us. And she compared these grants to that list to see which ones were coming from which ones. Buying gets the prize, but a lot of these large grants are related to harbor improvements. The SEC is the Seacoast Economic Council. And that's part of MassWorks efforts. Anyways, this is the list. I wasn't going to go over each one.
No, it's good.
It does provide a list of them. So so over 10 years, it averaged a little over 500,000 a year. And represents, so that's about the equivalent of 2% tax rate. And I also added the state capital grants that the Housing Authority has received over the last 10 years, a little over 300,000, which is also, it doesn't come through the town, that's separate. But it would have an impact on the town.
Is the looking forward at the harbor dredging? That number seems a little low.
It's capped at what you can apply for each time.
Okay,
So you get I think it's a maximum of $1 million. I believe I have that right. So I just look forward on a couple of three larger ones that we would anticipate. The MassWorks one has been submitted for the water utilities project that would support the CST project. Cell signaling technology, sorry. File lab proposed for the limited commercial district. We've identified 2 granite sources for the rotunda repairs. And then another phase of dredging, we would anticipate about $1 million for the state. So this isn't all the grants that we received. This is just the grants that are impacted by the MBTA zone.
Today.
Today.
Today. Yeah, today's list, yeah, subject to change. So can't predict exactly what's going on.
And this is like a look ahead of maybe 3-5 years, something like that, or more immediate.
This look ahead is about a 3-year look ahead.
3 year.
And I didn't list the smaller ones. I just sort of focused on the bigger.
Yeah, we've applied for a couple that are not on the list that would be impacted. But they're, as Greg says, they're small.
Yeah, they're under 100,000 typically.
Right.
Those things add up.
But yes, obviously, as you can see, over the last 10 years, they do add.
So
So
I would add to the list, possible funding for the renovation or expansion of the public housing properties, which will be some kind of a capital grant from the state, which I think might get affected.
Yeah, no, there's certainly others potentially in the works. But
Well, that 3-year list adds up to 8.1 million if I did my math. So it's a pretty substantial sum.
And then sort of blue skying, it's not really blue sky, but is the coastal impact of tidal level changes and some of the impact we might have on our roadways, our parks and so forth from climate change or whatever you want to call it, that we would presumably kind of be looking for some grant money for.
correct.
And that's hard to,
So we do have one we do have about 200,000 that we're waiting. We should hear in another few weeks, actually. It would fall under this.
If we're looking forward 3 years, is there any way that might come in for the DPW?
Not like that. Not like that.
Just from your tax dollars.
Is there some way to get this list on the website so that people who are
Sure,
listening?
we could put this document up.
Yeah. I
Put it on.
certainly would put a total and say that for those 4, I mean, it averages 2.7 million a year. Of the look ahead of the 3-year look ahead grants.
If you added those in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, no, if you take what you have here, it's 8.1 million. If you divide that over 3 years, it's $2.7 million a year.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. So that's sort of a quick synopsis. I don't know if you wanted more details, but that I think gives you the
It's
overview.
very helpful.
Provides the numbers.
Any other questions from the board? You heard from the audience here?
Yep. Karen Bennett, 28 Lincoln Street. I understand that the section of the law, 40A, lists the 3 grant buckets as housing, local capital, and mass works,
Yes.
and nothing else.
No,
Are these
So then
all
they-
of that?
They came out with a supplement then to that. in
They
August.
did,
Yeah.
right, but they're not enforceable, from what I understand. The other ones that were added are not enforceable, that they cannot force us to do anything with the 48 law on the additional grants. Is that true?
I haven't heard that.
Okay, if somebody could check that out, I'd appreciate that.
Where did your information come from?
A lawyer,
Could
I'm
you-
speaking to an attorney that I don't want to share with right now.
Well, say the name of the attorney
No, I
or who
won't.
they're affiliated with.
I'll just say it's an attorney.
An attorney.
So somebody that specializes in this stuff, so I would hope that somebody would check that out, because from what I understand that the state cannot enforce that. I'm sorry, you're smirking, is there a reason?
No, I'm just listening.
Okay, you were just smirking, I didn't know if it was just, there was a reason for that. Okay. But from what I understand, the law, you cannot enforce the additional grants other than those 3, so I'd like to understand that personally.
When you say not enforced,
Right.
does that mean that you can?
They cannot withhold those grants other than those 3 categories.
But if they can withhold any grant application.
Right, but they can also, and we also say that we've applied for all these grants, but let's be real, how much have we really gotten from the state? It's no more than 2% is what we've received. So be
2% of on the tax rate.
2% on grants, if you go back, is what we've received.
These numbers aren't saying that, Karen.
Okay, well,
These are grants that were actually granted in the last
Correct.
10 years.
correct, I understand that. But let's spend a little bit of time going back and understanding the law a little bit about what we're forced to do. Just my opinion, just think that's something that we should check into.
Okay, thank you for your comment. Ray, yes.
Yeah, it just, to me, this isn't the bigger issue. The bigger issue is the legal challenges that I think we would subject ourselves to if we were not to apply.
Agreed.
And the cost of that.
Correct.
I would just add one thing on the grants. I was going to mention it later, but I think now is a better time. I attended an office hours of the group that promulgated the state department that promulgated the regulations, and that will be authorizing our compliance plan and our proposed zoning on Tuesday. And the next one's in October. I'll send everyone on the committee the link because I learned a lot. But one thing that they said about the grants is that although they have sent out this list and those buckets in the law, that the state is reserving the right to take into consideration when approving or rejecting a grant application from any MBTA community, our state of compliance. So it's a moving target. And I think my read and my understanding of the way the state answered the questions about that is it is a risk. That's how they'll enforce it. We won't get our grants approved. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you.
Is that on the recording somewhere?
They are going to post the slides, and I think it's included in the slides. I'm not sure if it was recorded, but it was a virtual office hour, so it may have been, but you can check the mass.gov/MBTA communities
Okay.
website.
Okay. Any other comments from anyone on this?
Is there anyone online? Because I got a few texts saying they couldn't get in the password.
There are 12 people online,
Okay.
and Sarah Pierce has her hand raised.
Oh, okay, Sarah.
Hi, yes, Sarah Pierce, 9 Friend Street. Thank you. I just wanted to, I guess, make a point in saying that a lot of people I know you're working on gathering facts and information, giving it out to people, but I think it is important to know for the public that the town, you may not receive grants, but that other towns are not going ahead with this MBTA program, and that is an option. And that hasn't been really focused upon. I know there was an article that Mr. Olney wrote or quoted about at least acknowledging that you did not have to go ahead. And I think we need to ask ourselves, especially as the MBTA task force and as a town, are we willing to drastically change? And I think the reality of it is, as you just said in your 16 questions, there is going to be a lot of change to the town. And are we willing to do that over getting some grants and funding? I mean, we would need to address these infrastructure issues if there wasn't an MBTA program. And are we choosing some grant monies over basically preserving Manchester by the Sea how as it is now? Thank you.
Well, I have a couple of things to say. Only one town, I believe, has stated that they will comply. And I believe it's the town of Holden. And I believe the Attorney General is already bringing a legal action against the town. So I think everyone else is at least making an attempt to comply. Who knows what will happen over next year, but that's my understanding of what's happening.
Were there
Isn't
other
isn't our mission to present a solution and also to accurately present the cost and implications of not agreeing? I mean, it's not really our job to make that decision. It's our job to find a possible zoning solution and also to make clear what the cost of not complying will be.
Yes, exactly
Yes,
right. Thank you for
yes.
making that comment. In fact, the decision is made at town meeting, so the voters will have to weigh the weigh the changes to zoning that we're gonna be, recommending or proposing or not, and, we'll let the voters decide.
I'd also like to say that at least in certainly the discussions that have happened both in the subcommittees and in this room, the goal of the task force is to preserve the character of the town. I mean, one overarching goal is that. And the question is, can you do that and be compliant? And I mean, if you're a data wizard, Sarah, maybe you know the answer already, but looking at reams of data so far, I don't think the answer is clear. So we need to be patient and let the facts arise and tell a story.
And can I just ask one more follow-up question? I guess I am confused by some of the information that I've gathered from the meetings and reading. The state is looking for housing to be created and zoning to be changed, but they must not really be interested in how many multifamily homes we have that are occupied. Are we looking to build that, let's say that number is 550, are we looking to build new construction of 550 units? I know you're looking also to rezone, but how many units do we actually have to add to get to that?
We don't have to add any, actually, to point of fact.
Oh,
All we have to do is allow them by right. And there are currently, in the general district, something near 500 existing units. Within a half mile of, well, I guess we get into this shortly, but within a half mile radius, there are what, 900 units maybe?
Around 895.
So we can comply with this without building a single unit.
but then how is it creating housing?
The state is not requiring us to build housing, it's requiring us to
To provide
allow housing,
capacity.
to allow the capacity for housing. Whether or not it gets built is not gonna be something that is gonna be in our control. Well, what is in our control is what the density should be and where and what kind of design controls will we impose on any new housing that does result in this.
I think it's confusing from what you read, even from MBTA statements, and then pieces in the paper that we're in a housing crisis and that we need to build housing that's close to, or have housing that's close to the MBTA and train stations so people can get places easily. But I guess I don't understand how we're creating anything if we're not adding units and we already have occupied multifamilies, but maybe I'm missing something.
I think the reality of the law is it's covering hundreds of towns,
Yes.
which are very diverse. And
Mhm.
the intent is to override the local zoning, particularly in those towns that have exclusively 1 acre zoning. Manchester is different because it's more dense in its downtown area.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, let's move on. Okay, calendar for phase 1 communications. So communications subcommittee is met.
I've been tasked with reporting on our subcommittee.
Good.
We have met twice. And thanks to Tiffany, we have a terrific communication plan that we voted to adopt at our last task force meeting. You already covered one of the main points of our discussion in today's meeting, which is we need to work hard as a task force to send out one consistent message so that people like Ms. Pierce and others who are listening don't get different pieces of quote unquote facts from different members of the committee which conflict. We don't want that because this is confusing enough. We successfully came up with a piece to be included in Greg's quarterly newsletter, which goes out with the tax bill. Residents will receive that around October 1st. And we have a nice statement, I think, in there, which is hopefully just factual regarding the work of the task force and what the law requires. The subcommittee is meeting every other Thursday morning at 9:30 in room 7. So far, we're virtual we're in room 7, but the public can join virtually. One of the things we talked about today, which also, Chris, you're already doing, was how to make sure the public can ask their questions during our meetings, and that's happening, I think, pretty seamlessly
Which
right
is
now.
great.
The next thing is our first event, communication event. We're hopefully going to be able to stick with the October 14th event. Tiffany is working on some visual aids. We talked about a couple of different kind of large maps to have available. One of our zoning districts, one that will show density, one that will show the half-mile radius. And we're gonna have the finalized version of the FAQs. And obviously people will be there in person to help answer questions, and Tiffany is going to arrange refreshments. And I don't have a time and place yet, but it looks like we'll be able to stick with that.
Saturday, October 14th.
Oh, right,
Yes.
but we don't have a time
Right.
or the location.
Right.
Is that gonna be the site tour thing, where we walk around?
We have not talked about the contours.
Okay,
I don't know if we'll be ready for that yet, but maybe a limited walkabout.
okay.
And I think that's about it.
Great, thank you. Any questions about it? for the board? Anyone from the public have anything to say about this?
I'll just say on behalf of communications that communications is maybe the most important thing we're doing here. We don't want people walking away saying, oh, they want to tear everything down and build, high rises or something. We really want to be transparent and candid and factual, I think, and not threatened in any way. There are no, at least I'm not aware of any particular agendas here. So I think communication and the tenor of the communication is really important.
Yes.
So,
And the only thing I would add to that is to underline how important it is 3 times, because the situation is clearly evolving. So there will be changes, and we're gonna have to keep up with them ourselves, but also make sure the citizens of the town know as things
Absolutely.
change.
There was one thing I forgot to mention, and that is, this is a combination of our discussions in our subcommittee and my having attended the training on Monday on open meeting law. And just a couple of things to remind our task force and members of the public who interact with our task force that one way we can help make communication consistent and factual is to not have sort of side conversations, either during our meeting, the emails or texting between members of the task force and the public. Those are, if somebody gets a communication like that during the meeting from a member of the public, need to alert the chair, and that communication will have to be shared, and that includes a note that gets passed or
I'm getting a
text.
little uncomfortable with the extent of the gag rule that's being applied.
Well, that comes from the open meeting law.
If someone sends a communication to me, even if they send it to somebody else as well, I would like to, I will respond to it.
I think I can answer this. Yeah, that's a very good point, Ian. I think if somebody sends you a personal email, you can respond and answer and say, "I'm speaking for myself, I'm not
Yes.
representing the task."
Yes, yes.
And then you can answer away.
If they send it to me and you, can I respond?
No, I don't think you can.
It's terrible, I know,
I
but
don't
we
think-
pretty much have said the task force is gonna speak with a voice.
A single.
I'm
voice.
not saying that I'm responding for the task force.
Oh,
I'm saying that there are people who send stuff to me and sometimes to other people to whom I would like to be able to say something that has a disclaimer at the bottom. And any of you who've ever had an email from me in the past 2 years.
that's right. I'll vouch for that. That's right.
Well, the disclaimer is important.
And I won't send it to, I will send it directly to the person who asked. I won't send it to the rest of the task force or anybody else.
As long as you say, I'm speaking not for the task force, I'm speaking.
Yeah.
For Ann.
Well, that's what it says in her disclaimer.
Yeah.
This is her own personal opinion.
What do you think?
Yeah,
I mean, we didn't write the open meeting law, so our best,
Okay, but I'm not sharing my opinion with any of you outside of the meeting.
That's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
You can respond to personal emails.
yeah, of course.
There's nothing to do with open meeting law.
I
It's
think
a
the
single
question is,
person.
if somebody says that something to all of us,
Right, then it's, right,
then
We should answer
we should answer
Right.
collectively.
in a congregate fashion.
I think
The
one
only
of,
problem with that is that we get an email today. 2 weeks later, we meet. We discuss, someone takes on the charge of responding. And it's 3 weeks later that somebody gets,
Yeah, that's right.
It's terrible.
Yeah.
agree.
I think that when the email comes in that's addressed to the task force, Gail has to give a response to the person saying it will be taken up at the next
you
meeting.
can
and we'll
expect to hear from
respond
us
to you.
in 3
Yeah.
weeks.
yeah,
And if somebody asks a question during an open meeting, then we all are free to answer it ourselves. We can all express our own opinions, but it's in an open context, so everybody knows. I think the problem is if you answer and they assume that you're speaking on behalf of the task force.
and the other, the one-on-one I talked about was when we're sitting here in a meeting and someone sends me an email during the meeting about what we're talking about.
Fine, then send it. That's,
That was, I think I was not clear on that, okay,
I think we're clear.
thank you.
But thank you for raising a very good point. Thank you for clarifying. Or making money or whatever.
I don't like being gagged.
We're not gagging you, we're only gagging you as the spokesperson for the town.
That's
Yeah,
it on
that's it.
communication.
Okay, are we ready to move on? Draft data within the half mile of the MBTA station.
So, couple of task force people and I have looked at the numbers and I have some questions of the assessor, because I think we've all ended up with different numbers for what's in the half-mile radius. So I'm hopefully meeting with her on Monday. I was trying to meet with her today, but she had a training. So hopefully we can get something finalized and up on the web.
So is the discrepancy what the definition of a unit is that what it is?
Not so much that, it's just some buildings are known to have more units than what the assessor's office indicates. So
So roughly, what are we talking?
we're not off by that much, we're off by, 20 to 30 in either direction.
And the number is 900 residential units?
So the assessor's office did a calculated a mailing for everybody within the district, and they came up with 895.
895 sort of addresses of
Residential
units.
Units.
but some of those could be single family, some could be three families, some could be apartments of four.
Some could be commercial,
Yeah,
so,
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
And the mixed use stuff is unclear.
yeah, the mixed use stuff needs to be.
But it's roughly 900 units. And how many acres are there within the half acre? Is that
500 acres. Yeah, half mile.
500 acres?
500 acres. And a half miles.
We should probably have that at our fingertips.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's it.
Higher.
Yeah, 'cause they said,
square.
they said 10% was 50 acres, which is what they said, you don't want 10%. It was only 50 acres.
Oh, okay, so
It will drop.
Okay, so the overall residential density within the half mile of the train station is around 2 units an acre. Something like that. But that includes Powderhouse Hill Reservation and the harbor and all kinds of other things. So it's really, obviously, the density is much higher. Right? Maybe we should, something we can. At the basic. Okay, anything else on that? That's it?
I took a slightly different approach, and I have compiled within the MBTA circle the density per acre by every street and the density per acre by every building. The density per acre by every building is useful because it tells you, for example, how a particular apartment building or condominium would compare with the 15 unit per acre requirement. And if you look at the density per street, it gives you an idea very quickly of where we have high density streets. Then you can break that down into the individual units. It's mostly where you expect it. I don't think there's any big mysteries. And I think, I personally am not sure why we need a lot more detail than that in order to start for at least for the brainstorming effort. But at any rate, that's what I have. And if it's of use to anyone, I'm happy to provide it.
Yeah, if you could share that, send it to Gail and she can share it with us, that might be interesting.
That'd be great.
I did an additional sort on it
Okay,
to try and understand by type of use, because mixed use is a pretty interesting use downtown.
yeah. Okay, anything else about data? We'll just be happy with it.
There is a sheet that defines each of those codes,
Yes,
what it means.
yes,
Is that the?
that's
state
right, but some of it's a
classification?
little unclear.
Okay, subcommittee updates. Well, we just had one from the communication subcommittee. The zoning subcommittee,
Sandy, Sarah, sorry.
Sarah.
We met on Monday. And we talked about the various districts that could be conceived. We were talking about within the downtown area, and then we also considered some locations outside of the downtown area. We talked about working on, and I've been working on it, we'll discuss it again Monday, but working on some type of language that we could incorporate to make all the existing properties conforming. And, maybe doing something where if somebody has X number of units today, they would be able to have X number of units forever. So we're working on that to try to come up with something so that we can count even our small lots. So we're working on that.
It's sort of the preservation zoning idea. that we had
Mhm.
mentioned.
We looked at where we could come up with 5 acres outside of downtown. We also talked about Harbor Point, and do you do that differently than the rest of the streets in downtown?
Mhm.
So that's, did I miss anything, Danny? Okay.
Let me ask a question,
Uh-huh.
this is a little technical. Is it possible to do something kind of like zoning, but call it a license instead of zoning? And
To
well, for
conform?
instance, suppose we had a non-conforming building in this half mile, but instead of trying to change the zoning with using a spatula to spread it over the whole zone, we say, well, there are going to be certain non-conforming buildings, and we're going to award them a license.
But I don't believe that will qualify
Okay,
for inclusion in the MBTA zoning,
Alright,
because it requires a zoning bylaw. So the thought was, if you could say something like everything existing as of 1/1/24, whatever date you pick, they have the right to maintain those number of units.
okay.
Um,
I'm just trying
you
to get
know.
around it in a slightly different way. than
Yeah,
calling it a
I think it
license.
has to be a bylaw change, but I think it can be an overlay district to ease
Okay.
it, but I don't think we win anything by trying to go outside of the bylaw. It needs to be approved by town meeting.
No, this could be approved by town
Yeah.
meeting, it would just mistake.
Well, so one of the questions is whether we're just gonna tinker with the general district, which is big enough to qualify, or are we going to expand out beyond the general district?
Well, what we were looking at is we were looking at certain streets, we were looking at a core of streets that were all connected.
Mhm.
And we came up with about 15 acres, which is what we need. And therefore we said, and it was mostly multifamily uses today. And then the thought was, well, let's look outside and see if there's some larger areas, larger acreage. Like one of the ones that came up was the Family Medical Associates land, where there's a large plot of land.
In the LCD.
Yeah,
Right,
but
18 to 20 acres.
yeah, so if you can have an overlay district in that,
Right.
and make it available, and there were some others that were looked at around town, but they were mostly way out. We steered clear of single residence zoning areas.
Mhm.
Smith's Point.
Yeah, we steered clear of that.
Rockville,
Fire Rock Hill.
Yeah. Yeah,
nice 17-acre set.
yeah, no, so and we're gonna talk about it more Monday, and then I'm gonna kind of come up with, I've been working on wording to see if we can make the non-conforming properties conforming in the overlay. That's great. Might solve a lot of our problems.
So your next meeting is Monday, next Monday?
Mhm.
At 10.
10 a.m. in room 7 and on Zoom. The agenda has been posted.
Great.
Anybody is welcome.
Okay, well, this is moving along very nicely, so, let's see, is there any comments people want to make on items not on the agenda tonight? Any public comments or anything on board?
I do. I want to talk more about this office hours that I went to. So this was the EOHLC, and both Emma Snellings and Nathan Carlucci were there to answer questions. It was very much a tone of the state wants to help get you successfully over the finish line. How can we help? Not, you're doing it all wrong. That's not what it says. So I was encouraged by the tone. There were about 40 people on from towns all over who have very different geographies and also timelines. So it was really interesting. I learned a lot. They spent a lot of time talking about multi-use zoning. And so there was quite a bit of discussion about how towns could use that to their advantage. And one thing that I thought was interesting is that if you do an overlay, an MBTA zoning overlay on a mandatory mixed use district, which we don't have, but maybe we want to have, because that will help people feel better about the possibility of all our commercial buildings being leveled, like Allen's or Crosby's or wherever. I mean, right now, we don't have a protection against that. People want to, my sense is, people would like some sort of protection for that. So if we did a mandatory mixed use zoning district and then put an MBTA zoning overlay, then multifamily housing could be allowed as of right above the first floor in the commercial buildings.
Yeah. How would that affect the single family houses that are mixed in with our, like Vinnie Terrell's house?
I don't know which one that is.
That's
yellow
the
one.
railroad, the yellow by the railroad tracks next to the hardware store. Would he have to put in a,
Would he have to? No, no, but if that house got sold and someone wanted to put a business on the first floor and multifamily above it, my understanding, and again, we would be the ones crafting it.
so
I was, the wording I was working on was gonna require that any existing commercial retail needed to be maintained.
Right, and
And make it
could
that
be.
simple.
And it could be, as long as, and we could put an MBTA zoning overlay on it. And we could take a offset from our total number of units required, which could help us, and other towns are doing that. So that's something to be explored. If we do want our mandatory mixed use units in, residential units in there to count towards our capacity total, we do have to get pre-approval for that. Well, for our entire plan, 90 days prior to town meeting. And commercial can only go on the first floor. But the entire district can still have other uses. For example, there can be a gas station that doesn't have housing over it. And you can still require special permits for your non-residential uses. Like a restaurant, we want guardrails around that. So it's something to explore. The other interesting thing was that grant discussion. So they said it will definitely be one of the factors to be considered by the state in deciding whether or not to approve grants applied for by MBTA communities, whether or not we're in compliance. So that's something to be considered. They also discussed Betsy's question about whether or not filled tide land or flood prone zones can be included, and the answer is yes, we can include those areas. And only all sensitive areas we can consider and can include. What we can't include is wetlands. That's the excluded land. And people asked about conservation. They said conservation is separate. They don't care if a conservation review is required. That's not part of a special permit process that affects whether or not it's as of right. So they're not concerned with areas that our town might have a conservation review required on a piece of property. what else did they say? I think that's about it. The next town hall,
Can I just interrupt for a
Yeah.
minute? How does including floodplain or tidal lands help us?
well, they actually said, we encourage you to consider whether or not a land is sensitive, but it is not excluded. Theoretically, if you put your entire district in sensitive land, that won't cause a problem for us in deciding whether your compliance plan will be approved.
But it's included in excluded lands.
Yeah, didn't they, the reason why we don't need 50 acres, we were allowed to go down to
Because they
37,
took that away.
was because of some of the tidelands, I thought.
Because of the harbor.
So,
If it's wetlands, but filled in tidelands that has things constructed on it now would be okay.
that's interesting.
We currently, I think those parcels that are filled in, that have been filled in since chapter 91 was enacted, require a chapter 91 permit. And our bylaws require a site
Special permit.
special permit to be before the chapter 91.
So we would have to change that. Got
Yeah.
it. Okay,
Could
so
we,
it might not help us.
could we change that for a specific area rather
Sure,
than?
yeah.
county?
Yes,
In the
yes,
overlay district. you could
Yes.
say,
yes,
So that's one more thing that we need to get on our list of.
right.
yeah.
So the last thing was just going over timing again, because some towns are really coming up on the clock. We are not. Even though we feel like we are. And they said, as long as you have everything submitted to us, you know, your draft zoning language, your maps, your GIS shape file, and you can send multiple versions. 90 days before your town meeting vote, it's okay if things change. They're willing to work with the towns and meeting their deadlines.
So flexibility.
And we don't have to worry about any approvals before the town meeting vote. Attorney General approval, anything like that, that's after the deadlines. So the next one of these is from 10 to 11 on October 17th, and I requested the link so I can send it to everyone, and I will do that.
Thank you. Well, that's a lot. Okay, any further comments, questions? That's great.
Go ahead.
With the topic of how many existing units relevant to that.
No, it was more a chance for people to ask questions that they had. They had, you know, the presentation on the mandatory mixed use prepared. But so there were sort of random questions from all over that. The number of units and capacity was not brought up. You can also submit questions beforehand. And then they will be prepared to address your specific question during that hour. So you can have, send them,
If I wanted
that's
to
top of
submit
the
that
list.
question
right,
to them, that's, there seems to be a lot of differences of opinion
right.
about that topic.
What do you mean, Greg?
The ability to count units that are already in existence for the 555.
Well, as long as you do an overlay and it's by right.
But they had to be built by rights in the first place.
I don't think they're taking that view, but we'll make sure we
It's
ask
not-
that
Yes, we had-
specific
It's not
question.
what it says. It says allowed by right.
But we'll make sure we ask that.
We are.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
We'll-
mean, it's
we'll
a simple
submit
matter of
that, yeah.
asking.
I mean, I have a list of questions that I've submitted to Nate for each. I haven't gotten responses back at all. So,
Let's say the click on those.
yeah.
Including not your timelines question, you got no answer to that, now they're saying it's fine.
Now we got an answer.
maybe the question should go through this office hours.
Yeah.
Thing instead of to Nate.
Particularly if it's recorded.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm dying to get
Well,
the
there you
recording.
go.
So I had a couple of comments. So I think the task force is aware that MIT and MIT class chose Manchester to as a it's basically a student project. And so one of the things that so we met with them today, Anne and Greg and I, and there's probably about a dozen students that we met with out front, and they were very eager. We walked around town and went up to Cutter House and walked through the open space, and some of them walked to the beach, and they were all over the place. So anyhow, they didn't ask as many questions as their professors thought they should have, but in any case, they are working on trying to figure out this project, and we've encouraged them to kind of focus on downtown, or kind of the general downtown area, and
They're gonna come up with 3 different possible solutions.
Right.
For the downtown area.
Yep. And there's some architecture students, so and there's an architect who is one of the class leaders, and we've all been lobbying for visuals on what does 15 units an acre look like, and what I promoted was just out of the box thinking. And I was involved in a project in Winchester where we took a site and we hired 3 architecture planning firms, and they each analyzed the site, and it was a key element in changing the zoning in the downtown. So the downtown zoning in Winchester was pretty broken, so it went from a very conservative project to kind of a middle range project to a project that was just way out of the box. But all elements, all 3 of these provided some kind of interesting element or insight that people hadn't thought about.
Great.
So, and eventually it led to an RFP for redevelopment of the site.
So when are they coming back with their,
So
So,
the class would like to make 2 presentations.
okay,
A preliminary presentation late October.
late October,
And then a final presentation after getting some feedback, the preliminary, early December.
yeah.
Is this presentation in this task force?
Well, it's sort of up to us. At a minimum, I think it should be before you.
Yeah, I think it should be select board, planning board, and here.
Yeah, it'd be fun to broaden the audience.
yeah,
Now, do you want to have all those boards for their preliminary? Or do you want to give them a chance to talk first to this group and then?
I was thinking of that.
yeah,
Yeah, that makes
Yeah,
more
yeah.
sense.
less
I
intimidating.
mean, other people can come to your
Sure.
meeting. who-
Yeah.
No, we're gonna close this.
Right. The gag room.
They right.
So, yeah, that makes sense.
Can I ask exactly what the mission has been as put to these students? What geographical boundaries have they been given in their effort?
They haven't, yeah, the whole town.
But I thought I heard that they had decided they were going to focus on the downtown, and I'm not sure what that means.
That's for them to determine.
Okay.
The whole town is available. I think they may choose to focus on the downtown, but
Do they understand that parking is a major consideration and
That was one of their very first questions,
great.
parking and traffic.
And I talked to a couple of students, and they had read the housing production plan, they had read the master plan.
All right.
One of the first questions when we were sitting around the fountain was, as Ann said, was, is traffic a problem? This looks kind of crazy. Um, So
Yeah.
anyhow, it was interesting.
Let's have a different perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. More ideas are good.
Yeah.
We don't have to pay for it.
Well, there you go.
Okay,
Oh, you didn't know you were getting the bill?
you done with this?
I move we adjourn.
No, not
No,
yet.
no, we
We
have
have
to
to,
do the minutes.
we have to approve the minutes.
I have a question about the minutes.
Okay.
Wait a second. Right at the end on the third page of it, about, Sarah's task force on zoning changes. If I'm remembering correctly, the idea of it was to keep things moving forward now. So it was, I think you commissioned it for a 6 to 8 week idea. But to keep things moving forward until a consultant was really identified and on board.
Would you like to add that to the minutes?
Sure. I mean, that's what I believe, recollect the conversation was. And
Mm-hmm.
then,
I think that's accurate. It was a little fuzzy, but you know, it's probably accurate that we.
We wanted to give ideas to the consultant.
Yeah.
yes,
Richard has something to say about this, Richard?
Yeah, I haven't seen the minutes. I don't think they were posted. But I suppose they've been handed out there. My recollection on this was that we had, and I certainly had voiced concerns about exactly what the operating role was going to be with consultants and how we go back and forth, what kind of guidelines we give them and so forth. I don't know that a subcommittee is the best way to deal with that, but I am very concerned about just exactly how much we give up to a outside consultant in this planning and exactly how closely we are able to follow through on where they're going with their plans, because there's not going to be an infinite number of plans we're going to get from them. We're just not going to have time.
I completely agree with you, Richard, by the way.
Yeah, I would think they have no control. They're working for us.
right.
So I think we tell them what we want.
They're gonna follow your parameters.
Yeah.
And that follows along with, we sort of talked, I guess, this morning a little bit about when we get these consultants, we might want to kind of see them or something like that, or at least, or, you know, before the decision is made, you know.
Oh, sure, we can interview them.
Yeah.
absolutely.
I
I
think
mean, the
we
issue
should.
is they're working for you. You tell them what you want or what your goal is. And they work on that. And if they have run into a speed bump where it's not in compliance with the guidelines or the compliance model, they'll come back to you and say, you know, gee, I ran this compliance model for this area that you suggested, or for the area that we're studying,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it doesn't seem to work, but we can,
What do you think we should do for next?
Yeah.
So, while we're on this topic, the RFP, is that posted somewhere?
I don't think so.
So we can put it up on the website.
Yeah.
That'd be
Sure,
good.
that'd be
And-
great.
And when proposals come in, could you share them with everybody?
I'm not gonna see them, he's gonna see them.
Oh.
He's the purchasing agent.
You gotta
You're supposed to have a
promote
pencil behind your ear.
No.
Yet another
The green
role.
shade.
Yeah, green shade, pencil behind the ear.
Yes, to answer your question.
it. Okay, great, good. And then I think we can probably start thinking about what, exactly how we want them to work for us.
Yes,
And that might be the topic at the next meeting.
it's a great idea.
Okay, so are people willing to approve the minutes with these? I don't know if we have specific wording that you want to.
Let's see, I can provide Betsy, I've scribbled something here that, approved as a temporary 6 to 8 week group to continue progress while the consultant is being identified and brought on board. And then, it was with, Denny, Richard, Sarah, and any other task force members who wish to attend.
Okay. Would anyone like to move to approve the minutes with that change?
So moved.
And a second,
Second.
any discussion on this?
I will abstain.
I have to abstain also.
Because you weren't here.
So, do we have, I guess, do we have one to approve one?
Oh, Richard.
Oh,
You
Richard,
can vote.
I didn't see, I don't know when they came, I didn't see.
how about if we make those changes and then we'll take that up at the next one?
That sounds
Sure.
good, yeah.
All right,
Good.
let's do that.
Good.
That's why I didn't see them, because it was so short.
Okay,
I move we adjourn.
do I have a second?
Second,
All in favor?
Aye.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
thank you.
That was good.
Yeah, not bad. Almost up to your standards.